All right, so it's been 3 weeks, I guess. I think Jimmy taught for a couple of those weeks, and then we had 1 week where we didn't have class. So I think Jimmy said that he was teaching a couple lessons on Philippians, and maybe we'll pick that back up a little bit, I guess, here after hopefully I finish up Job in the near future. I don't remember how long we've actually been doing Job. Somebody asked how long we took on Job, because they were going over Job, and I said, oh, I think we've been doing it for like 2 years. So that wasn't every week for those 2 years, but I think it's been like 2 years since we started it. So, of course, the way I've taught Job, we haven't like gone through chapter and verse of Job for all that time. You know, we spent some time going on little tangents. Is that what they're called, tangents? Is that right? I think that's the right word. You know, things that come out of the scripture there in Job that we could talk about. And of course, we spent, I don't know, 2 or 3 months talking about evil, pain, and suffering, and you know, how does that work with a God who's good and all-powerful? Like, we spent a lot of time going through those kind of things. So anyway, I told him that may not be the best guide to go by, that it's taken us a couple of years to go through it. But anyway, we are now into the final stages of Job, and we just had started in on Job 38. And I'm just going to kind of do my introduction here again to this section, and then we'll get right into it. And I don't know how long it'll take, but I'm guessing not more than a couple weeks, because I don't think we'll have quite as much discussion on this part, even though it's a really cool section of Job, because God is speaking and talking, and we can learn a lot from that. So in chapters 38 through 41, God is coming in, and he does most of the talking in these chapters. He comes out of a whirlwind, and we talked a little bit about, where'd the whirlwind come from? Did it just pop up, or was it approaching the whole time as Elihu was speaking, or what happened there? But whatever the case, God comes in and starts speaking out of this whirlwind. And we talked about how some people try to use some scriptures to show how people who wrote the Bible had more scientific knowledge than did the typical people of the day. And that's true to a certain degree, in that if you go through the Bible, you don't find the prominent theories of the day that were in error being promoted in the Bible. However, that doesn't mean that the people who were speaking in the Bible weren't wrong in some of the things they said, because as we've been discussing the whole time through Job, were any of the people that were talking in Job absolutely correct about what they were saying? I'm shaking my head no, because they weren't. So they weren't, the people as they were speaking here weren't inspired. The writing is inspired, but the people certainly could say things that were in error. But in this section, as I said, 3 weeks ago, if there was anything that God said that was incorrect, that could be proven incorrect from a scientific viewpoint, then there would be a lot of problem with that. But what we've seen of scientific discovery and even of recent discoveries, there hasn't been anything, in my opinion, that would indicate that. So anyway, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through the scriptures, and then kind of talk through some of the scientific things. Now, as I said, as we're going through here, some of the things that I'll bring up aren't actually specifically brought up in the scripture, just brought up to kind of emphasize how what God says makes sense with the way things actually are, and with what's going on there. So we're going to start off, let's do Job 38, 1 through 11, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. One of you guys back there want to read that?
Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is at the darkened counsel by words without knowledge? By gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you and instruct me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, have you understanding? Who sets the measurements, since you know, or who stretches out the line on it? or where its base is sunk, or who laid its cornerstone. Then the morning stars sang together, and the Son of God shouted for joy. Or who enclosed the sea with doors, then bursting forth, it went out of the womb. Then it made like a cloud of its garment, and its thick darkness swaddled band. And I placed boundaries on it, and set it in a bolt indoors. And then I said, thus far from you shall come, but no farther. And here shall your proud waves stop.
All right. So as we discussed the last time I spoke several weeks ago, God in this beginning of the section does what I call a shock and awe campaign by providing, overwhelming Job with a display of his sovereign majesty. He asks a series of questions that are meant to really emphasize two propositions. One, that God is sovereign in the natural order of the universe. He created it. And two, that he's also sovereign in the moral order of the universe, that he set right from wrong. So that's what his questions are meant to emphasize. In the first part here, he asks Job why Job thinks that he's qualified to call God into question. So he's emphasizing, right away, where were you, basically, when all these things happened. If you remember, we read the first 7 verses, I think, last time. And in I read, as part of the introduction here, an article by Ken Ham talking about were you there? And in that article, he's basically answering a question from somebody that is basically saying, how do you know what happened? Were you there? And of course, we talked a little bit about how we would ask the same question right back to somebody who would argue evolution or things like that. How do you know? Were you there? But the key is that how can we know? The only way you can know is for somebody to have been there. Then there's only one source that we know of that claims to have been there, right? When the world was created, and that would be God. So it goes back to, do you believe what the Bible says? We also talked a little bit about, just to emphasize some of these things here in the first 7 verses, about the way the earth, the things that we know about the earth now, that they wouldn't have known then, but that makes sense with what God said about the foundations of the earth, and what those words meant, how the earth has, measurements that are important to different aspects, weather and things like, to sustain life, and how what God says in these verses would make sense. So we were ready to go into verses 8 through 11, which DP just read. And here in 8 through 11, God continues the questioning by asking about the creation of the sea. Once again, to reveal Job's lack of knowledge. He indicates that he had enclosed the sea and made boundaries for it. How much of Earth's surface is water? 78%. I had down 71, so 70. You have somewhere. See, there's differing things. So yeah,
nobody's actually measured.
So it's a lot. It's a lot, right? The majority, you would say, of the surface is water. And the average height of land, I read, is 2,250 feet, while the average depth of the ocean is 13,000 feet, meaning that if you were to smooth everything out, there wouldn't be any land. Everything would be covered. The amount of water that is on the earth, they found, is necessary to keep the proper temperature, supply rain vapor, but it's also contained in a way that allows land to exist and to function. So once again, this shows design, like that something had a hand in that. You talk about creative design. Danny Faulkner has an article titled "Examining Supposed Creation Passages in Exodus to Job," And he says that these verses here actually, he says that they actually refer to the flood more so than creation. And at first I was kind of like, it seems like creation to me. But then as I went back and read through it, some of the wording in it could refer to the flood, where it says, who enclosed the sea with doors. That would seem to be creation. But then when bursting forth, it went out from the womb. When I made a cloud its garment, and thick darkness its swaddling band, and I placed boundaries on it, and I set a bolt and doors, and I said, thus far you shall come and no further. So I don't know which way you would want to interpret that, but it was an interesting take that maybe it's referring to how he controlled the flood on that. But then he also goes on to say that clearly once you get past that, it's referring, it seems to be, he's talking about things as they were in the time of Job. Like he starts talking about the weather patterns and animals and things like that. So you could see that might be a progression where he's saying, here's how I created the world, and then when I flooded it, and then here's how it is now, as a possibility. All right, so let's go ahead and do 12 through 15. Actually, maybe we'll do a little bit more than that. Do 12 through 21.
Have you ever in your life commanded the morning and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth and the wicked be shaken out of it? It is changed like clay under the seal, and they stand forth like a garment. From the wicked their light is withheld, and the uplifted arm is broken. Have you ever entered into the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have you ever, have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you understood the expanse of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light, and darkness, where is its place? That you may take it to its territory, and that you may discern the paths to its home. You know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is great.
All right, so here God interrogates Job with questions that, of course, Job can't answer about the way the morning comes and how the wicked are dealt with. And of course, at this time, once again, you remember they didn't have as much knowledge as we do about the way the universe worked and orbiting around the sun and rotation and all that sort of stuff. So we still don't understand it by any stretch. So think about how limited they were at that point in time. So they, that is interesting. Another thing here in verse 15, I find it interesting that as he's talking about the weather patterns and the days and nights and those kind of things, he says, and from the wicked their light is withheld. Why? How does that fit in this? Where does that come from? Why might God have said that at this point? Eternity, looking at it from an eternal perspective. That's possible, I think. It's also interesting, who had questioned God's, or who had said that God doesn't take into account the wicked or notice the wicked? Job, right? Yeah, Job had claimed that. So it also could be emphasizing here again that, you're stepping on places that you don't know. You don't have the knowledge to discuss that. But it is kind of just an odd placement. It talks about withholding their light, and the uplifted arm is broken. And then coming down a little later, it talks about light again, but this time from a what you see perspective. So that to me was a little interesting. The eternity might be a good take on that. I hadn't really gone down that road. So, all right, 16 through 21 that was read. God challenges Job about his knowledge of the way water functions and works in the ocean, and asks if he knows the width of the earth. He asks about light and darkness, like I said, And, and then he gets a little sarcastic with Job and talks about how old Job must be to have been there for all of this, to know all of this. And then he talks about, in verse 16, he mentions the springs in the sea. Now, this is one of the things where that have been proven true, that people wouldn't have known about at this time and day. You know, there are paths in the ocean. How many of you guys have seen Finding Nemo? You ever seen Finding Nemo? Is there a path in the ocean? Charles is like, I don't know. But yeah. But anyway, you know where I'm talking about, where the turtles get in there and go through the jet stream there, or whatever you want to call it. But there are paths in the ocean, and actually it's coming out of the ocean floor. The earliest secular reference to underwater springs is by the Roman geographer Strabo, who was about the time of Christ. So you're talking quite a bit of time there. But submarine springs have been found off the coast of Greece, Italy, Israel, Syria. Fresh water flows up into the sea off the coast of Australia. I forget if that's what Finding Nemo, if that was the stream or not. But God also mentions the recesses in the deep. So Job wouldn't have known about these canyons. You know, they didn't have the technology to go down and examine how deep down into the ground the canyons go under the ocean and all that. But of course, we now know that the floor of the ocean is basically the same as it is above. You have all the same features, the valleys, the mountains, and all of those things, plains, plateaus, all of those things. In verse 19, God discusses and says, what is the way of the dwelling of light? That's an odd phrase, dwelling of light. I don't know exactly why it's worded that way, but I kind of translate it just as, do you understand the way of light, the way light works? At the time, of course, they didn't have any clue as to how light works. They thought it was just there, just transmitted instantly. It was 1676 when somebody named Olaus Romir, I don't even know how to pronounce his name, but he measured the velocity of light as evidenced by its delay as it traveled through space. So somebody noticed, hey, it's not instantaneous that this happens, and they measured it. Then Christian Huygens proposed the wave theory of light in 1678, and then of course, who's the one that you think of as discovering light? How it travels. Einstein. Not Einstein. That's relativity. Isaac Newton. Yeah, he suggested that light is actually small particles that travel in a straight line, and that was in 1704. Now then, when I looked up this stuff, I get different measurements depending on what article I was looking at. I don't know if it's because one's older, they have newer information, or what it is, but like what I found, it says that light travels at 186,000 miles per hour.
That's considered standard, but new information is that the speed is variable.
Right. Well, yeah, we'll get into that. Yep. Generally 186,000 miles per hour.
Per second.
Per second?
Yeah. Per second.
Oh, it's per second. Okay, per second. I wrote that down wrong. Scientists now use the speed of light to measure large distances in the universe. Once again, when I looked it up, I found that it says the observable universe is 93 billion light years across. And maybe they meant the observable space, because that's way different than like Wayne Jackson, which once again, his book was back in the early 80s, said that it's he said the solar system is 26,000 light years in distance. So it's two different things like there, I guess. 93 billion light years across, 26,000 light years across our solar system. Anyway, you're talking big, huge, we can't even think of how huge you're talking here. When Once again, when I looked it up with the current information, it said most of it's 1 to 2, the solar system is 1 to 2 light years across. So I don't know which way it's correct, but either way, when you're talking those speeds and that much, it's a long way. So it's a little bit different. But anyway, all these things just, show, once again, that God knew. Now, once again, he didn't lay all this out. He didn't tell us that, well, this is the way that light works or anything like that. But he didn't say anything that was like, well, the light that was transmitted instantly, today, he didn't say anything in error as we're going through this. And there were some things, as we noted, that have been found that were mentioned specifically as you go through here. Anybody have any other interesting tidbits on this section that you want to talk about before we go on to verses 22 through 30? All right, good. All right, let's go on to 22 through 30 then.
I have entered the storehouse of the snow, or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of distress, for the day of war and battle? Where is the way that the light is divided, or the east scattered on the earth? Who has cleft a channel for the flood, or a way for the thunderbolt, to bring rain on land without people, on a desert without man on it, to satisfy the waste and desolate land, and make the seeds of grass to sprout? Where are we going here? And has the rain a father? Who has begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb has come the ice, and the frost of heaven, who has given birth? Water becomes hard like stone, and the surface of the deep is imprisoned.
All right. So in these verses, God turns his questioning toward weather events as evidence of his power. And of course, once again, remembering the time period, not a lot was known about the weather patterns, and I would argue, I'm going to get on my soapbox again, I would argue still not a lot is known. We have people who are trying to claim that they know what's happening and that we're warming or whatever because, this trend over the last 150 years. But I don't know if you guys remember, but when I was a kid, there was a great fear about a new ice age coming on.
Until 1982.
Exactly. And then it became global warming was the big fear. And now it's not called global warming anymore. What's it called? Climate change. See, they don't know. Climate always changes, yeah. We know that there are places, and I've said this before, but I'll repeat it again. There are places that were once desert that are now fertile. We know that. There are places that were once fertile that are now desert. We know that. These things change. Now then, how much impact do we have on it?
Zero.
I don't know if it's zero, but not in those big changes.
There's more debris from one volcanic eruption than humans have done in the last 200 years.
Yeah, that is very true. Yeah, a volcanic eruption does a lot more to the environment than anything we've done.
And we just had 10 volcanic eruptions around the world.
And not only that, but you guys remember Mount St. Helens?
Yes.
What's that? They thought, how long did they think it would take for things to grow back after that eruption?
100 years.
A long time. Guess what? I've been there. It's growing back.
Well, even the whole idea of the Grand Canyon took billions of years, except when Mount St. Helens blew, it took about 4 hours to create a massive canyon there.
Right. Yeah. So we've seen, if you're willing to look at it and see it, we can see that things happen that contradict these theories from these people that want to call it that. So anyway, that's my soapbox because it drives me nuts that you get all this. And not only, if they want to believe that, that's fine, but now they're using it politically and all kinds of stuff. And it drives me nuts. But anyway, we don't know. We don't have enough information. We don't understand the way things work. Once again, let me emphasize so that nobody misunderstands me, we should take care of the earth. We're the stewards. We should try to keep it clean and take care of it. But these things where people are like, we're destroying things with using fossil fuels or all that kind of stuff.
My third 10-year cycle of the earth dying in 10 years.
Yes. I've seen those doomsday clocks and things, and it's kind of like the people who claim that Jesus is coming back, or and they keep on setting these dates. It's the same thing from that perspective. So anyway, that's my soapbox. I'll leave that now, but we need to be aware of that. But God talks about the weather patterns that He's established, and how that works. So God He basically asks, who can control the weather? And the answer is implicit: nobody, except for we think we can today. But we can't. People cannot. Once again, with the caveat that we should take care of what we can, and not purposely poison it or destroy it or those kind of things. All right, let's go to 31 through 33.
Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades, or loose the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth the constellation in its season, and guide the bear with her satellites? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens, or fix their rule over the earth?
All right, so now God starts talking to Job about his knowledge of the stars in the heavens, which once again, comparatively, we know a lot more now than they did then. We still don't know a lot. People may think they do, but we don't. The questions he asks deal with the way the universe works. We see certain constellations in certain seasons because what do we know now that they didn't know then? Because of our orbit around the sun, right? So that's why we see certain things at certain times. Right now, my favorite constellation's up, Orion, and it'll be getting more prominent over the next couple months. So I love going out and just being, because it's so easy to see. Like, it's just, boom, there it is. But that one's a good one. But also, I think going back to what we talked about in verse 19 there with the light, God is talking about, whenever he talks about, let's see, where is it? Yeah, can you loose the cords of Orion? And then you consider light and the way that works. That might be referring to that, or it could also be referring to how far apart the stars in the constellation are, or how many different stars there are in the Pleiades, which at that time they couldn't have even seen them all because they can't be seen with the naked eye. You have to have a telescope to see them. So there's a lot of different things there. I wanted to take a moment at this point, even though this isn't necessarily specific to light, but we've talked about light a lot. And that's one of the things where evolutionists really come into, well, the Earth has to be this old because of how long it takes light to travel, Some would claim that the amount of time it takes for light we get from the stars, that it shows that the universe is billions of years old. Is that the case? No. Okay. And there's a couple of responses that we could have to that. One is a more simple, a simple answer, which was, many years ago, Professor Edward Young said very simply, why couldn't God, in the twinkling of an eye, have formed stars so that their light could be seen on Earth? That is a possibility. Now then, some scientists who are creationists would say that they don't like that answer. One in particular, his name is Dr. Jason Lyle. He has an article, it was written in 2007, it says, "Does starlight prove the universe is old?" And he addresses the age of the universe and whether stars can be used to prove how old the universe is. So he doesn't necessarily like just saying that God made it that way, because, and what he says is if he created the light beams already on their way, then that means that none of the events that we see in space actually ever happened. Like in other words, when you're saying that there's something that's 10,000, or let's just go big, 50,000 light years away, and I still don't know how they measure that or whatever, but if it's 50,000 light years away, and the age of the earth, some people say based on the biblical records, 6,000 to 12,000 years. So in other words, if we see something that's 50,000 light years away happening today, it never actually happened. Because like whenever you have a black hole forming or a star exploding or things like that, that would never happen. So he doesn't like the explanation that God just made it that way to explain why we see some of these events happening so far away and those kind of things. He says it would mean that exploding stars never exploded or existed. God merely painted pictures of the fictional events. He says it seems uncharacteristic of God to make illusions like this. God made our eyes to accurately probe the real universe so we can trust that the events we see in space really happen. For this reason, most creation scientists believe that light created in transit is not the best way to respond to the distant starlight argument. Let me suggest that the answer to distant starlight lies in some of the unstated assumptions that secular astronomers make. Now, in what he said, it's a long article and it's very technical, and so I don't understand it all. But there's a couple of big things that come out of it that I think are important to us. First off, what he said there are a lot of assumptions made by evolutionists to say this is the way it happened. Any of those assumptions fall, the whole theory falls. So once again, this is going back to what actually makes the most sense when you think about something. He says that they have to make a lot of assumptions in many of their conclusions. And going back to my soapbox there, what I just talked about, scientists claim, a lot of these claims that they make related to climate change. Once again, a lot of assumptions built in, a lot of, I always forget which it is, implicit or explicit, whenever you take one little sample and say, here it goes to the big, I forget which way that is, but yeah, extrapolating, and it's based on too small of a sample and faulty information and variables. Whenever you put variables into your problem solving, you put the wrong variable in, you get the wrong answer. All those kind of things. Dr. Lyle says that if just one of their assumptions is wrong, then so is their age estimate. He provides a few different possible explanations as to how we see stars that are so far away. And like I said, the two that I understand the best and can do a decent job of explaining, it's assumed that the speed of light is constant with time. But that may not have always been the case.
It's funny you mentioned that because I just read an article last week talking about how they've noticed a variance in light beams that are traveling just within our solar system.
Right.
And the speed traveling is...
And that's actually his second point. His second point is it is assumed that time flows at the same rate in all conditions, but that's not the case. Like, in fact, we know that, if any of you are science fiction people, time slows around a black hole. Once again, theory. Nobody actually knows because nobody's actually been in a black hole. But yeah, but that's the theory, right? So even if you go by their own theories, that time can change based on these events and things happening. Light can travel at different speeds within that. So that's his second point. But yeah, the first one is just simply, what speed did light travel during creation week? We know that things were not, the ordinary laws were not being followed in creation week because God was creating it, right? So it would be erroneous to just assume that everything was being done as we see it now. But at the bottom line is, so light could have traveled at different speeds during creation week. There are events out there that can change how fast things move in speed. And, who knows, we can't get out. We're not out there. We don't know what happens as different conditions could affect the speed of light, as well as just the time that it takes for things to move back and forth. So, we just can't make all those assumptions and say, oh, it takes millions of years for this light to get from here to there. We don't have that knowledge. They think they do. They claim they do, but we don't. And his concluding, Dr. Lyle's concluding sentence is actually the point that God made here at the beginning of the chapter in verse 4. He says that ultimately, the only way to know about the past for certain is to have a reliable historic record written by an eyewitness. That is exactly what we have in the Bible. So the Bible's the only place that would claim to know how we got here, the creation story. I mean, there's nowhere else that you can go. So you either believe it or you don't. So I think, and that also goes back to the article that I read from Ken Ham back a few weeks ago, where he was talking about, were you there? Well, no, none of us was there. Nobody can claim to have that knowledge. In verse 33, God asks Job if he knows the ordinances of the heaven or if he can fix their rule over the earth. In what way do the laws related to the heavenly bodies have effect here on earth? What might he be referring to there? What things out there have impact on us here?
A lot of stuff does. I mean, the rest of our soul.
The sun, yeah.
The tides.
The moon affects the tides, yep. Uh-huh.
Well, not only the moon, even the alignment of stars.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That changes, poor Pluto, that dwarf out there, even it has an effect here.
Yeah, so things around us impact us. So, they do have dominion over the earth. I know I've heard, this is just off the top of my head, about how the earth is perfectly positioned so that it doesn't ever get hit by meteorites. Like that things, I don't know if that's true or not. Well, I know that's I mean by huge, large things. I don't know if that's true or not. It's just it was an interesting take, because I think it has to do with the moon and the gravity from the sun and the moon and all those different things. Once again, something that I didn't do enough studying to learn. But anyway, that was interesting. But things we do know, the gravity of the sun creates the orbits of the planets in our solar system. It's 93 million miles away from the Earth. It's 109 times the size of the Earth. So how many Earths can fit inside the sun? Dave would know this, right? It says, what I saw said, it says 1 million could fit inside the sun. Does it matter how far away the Earth is from the sun?
Yeah.
Yeah, distance is a pretty important thing, right?
That's Mercury.
Yeah, could anybody live on Mercury? Yeah, we would definitely be different. We'd have to be composed differently. And of course, sunflight affects conditions on the Earth. Solar storms, I think Dave's our local expert on solar storms. Sunspots can interfere with radio, television, phone communication. And of course, here again on my soapbox, what's the greatest factor in our temperature here on Earth? The sun, right? Yeah, it's the sun. The sun is the greatest thing that changes the temperature on the Earth. Of course, the moon is about 240,000 miles from the Earth, and it impacts the Earth like what we talked about. It stays in orbit, and it has a huge impact on tides and the ocean, and it also produces energy. Those tides and all that produces energy, so that's pretty important as well. All right, we got just a couple of minutes. Let's see if we can finish 34 through 38 yet. I don't have a whole lot to say on that. Somebody want to read 34 through 38?
Can you lift your voice up to the clouds, that is an abundance of water will cover you? Can you set forth lightning, that they may go, and have you say, here we are? Here we are, yeah. Who has put wisdom in the innermost being, or understanding unto the mind? Who can count the clouds by wisdom, or the tip of water jars in the heavens? When the dust hardens into a mass, and the clocks stick together.
All right, so there's some interesting phrases in that part, but again, God is pushing Job to answer questions about the control of logical, there, I got the last part, forces. Each set of questions becomes increasingly pointed and emphasizing where Job stands compared to God. Once again, putting Job in his place. Can Job command the clouds to send rain? Can he command the lightning? Who commands the earth to send rain when it needs it? So, he's just saying, he's emphasizing, you can't do this. And it's, once again, so funny. People may think that we can today, but we can't. We can't stop it from raining anywhere. We can't stop it from not raining. That's why we have droughts and things like that. Verse 36 is a little bit interesting. Who has put wisdom in the innermost being, or has given understanding to the mind? What is the innermost being? Is it referring to, what's it referring to, I guess would be the question there.
It could be the soul, or it could just be another way of saying your mind.
Right. Yeah, it's something to do with people, I would say, with understanding.
Or any other animal. Because even other, I don't care if it's a dog, a cat, a moose, they still have understandings of their ways.
Right. Yep. So yeah, so basically is he asking, who gave people wisdom or the ability to think? Like saying, I gave this to you. You're the one, I'm the one that did that. So based on the context, in the middle of the verses about this being in the middle of the verses about weather, some scholars think that this is referring to the earth, actually, the inner part of the earth. But that doesn't necessarily work with wisdom unless you're talking about godly wisdom. But it could indicate that God made things in a way to do his bidding.
In ways that are observable if you use your head and observe it.
Right.
That's Romans chapter 1.
Right, yep. Once again, the emphasis is just being that we as people don't have that knowledge. And like I said, even with as many technological advances as we've had, especially over the last few years, it would be erroneous to try to claim that we understand any of that. So I think that's really the emphasis. All right, so we're going to stop there. We'll pick up in verse 39 next week. And like I said, from here we get into animals, a lot of discussion about animals. We'll cover them pretty quickly and get to, actually from here on, pretty much just talk about animals for the most part. So we'll cover that and then wrap it up somewhere over the next couple weeks. I don't know when it'll be, but we're going to get there. So thanks for